There was something in the air, a sense of mystery that hung over Megan and Steve. 10 months passed, and the tension grew. Doctors and family whispered, suggesting interventions, but Megan, firm in her instincts, resisted. What guided her? What did she feel that the world did not understand? When the moment of birth finally arrived, something inexplicable happened, and the impossible seemed to be just the beginning of a mystery to be unraveled. Megan and Steve were facing an agonizing weight, but at the same time, full of hope. That story had begun like so many others, with the dream of a couple in search of something that, despite being desired with all their hearts, seemed increasingly distant. The desire to be a mother, which had always been Megan's deepest desire, now seemed to slip through their fingers, like fine sand. For years, the couple had tried everything, traveled a long path of medical appointments, exams, and even ventured to follow unconventional advice that came from friends and family, always with their hearts in their hands and their souls full of doubts. But time, with its relentless harshness, seemed to be Megan's greatest enemy. Every month, she saw her dream fade away, and with each failed attempt, the tears that once came with force were now silent, as if her heart had learned to no longer wait. But there was something inside her, a stubborn flame that refused to go out. Something told Megan that, sooner or later, the miracle would happen. And finally, the day that seemed so unlikely arrived. It was a cold spring morning. The sun was already beginning to warm the first days of the month, but inside Megan, the feeling was that something was about to change. It wasn't like other mornings. It wasn't the usual feeling of discomfort or uncertainty that accompanied her days. This time, something was different. Something that she couldn't explain, but that stirred deep inside her. As if a more primitive, ancestral instinct was telling her that this would be the day. After days of hesitation and insecurity, Steve finally convinced Megan to take the pregnancy test. When she saw the 2 pink lines appear on the test, she burst into tears that seemed to mix disbelief, joy, and relief. That small and simple change in that piece of plastic was all Megan and Steve needed to start a new phase in their lives. And, as they hugged each other without saying a word, the world around them seemed to disappear. The only sound was that of their hearts beating, together, in the same rhythm. The news spread quickly through the family. Steve's mothers and grandmothers began to hustle and bustle, starting to prepare everything that would be needed for the baby, as if a small community of love and anxiety came together at that moment to celebrate the miracle that was about to happen. In the first months of her pregnancy, Megan felt enveloped by a feeling of lightness, a state she had not experienced in years. The fear and anguish of the past were now being replaced by a silent confidence that everything was going well. The doctor's appointments confirmed what she felt. The baby was healthy, growing strongly, and the doctor's words, always reassuring, became almost a mantra repeated in her mind. "Your baby is wonderful," he would say with a calm smile, which seemed to alleviate every one of her fears. With that, Megan began to give herself more and more to the preparations. The house, which was already a cozy home, was now full of plans and dreams. She spent hours and hours choosing the colors for the walls of the little room, researching furniture and thinking about the smallest details. The anxiety of creating the perfect environment for the child she so desired dominated her thoughts. Steve, seeing her so involved, dedicated himself wholeheartedly to helping her. Although he tried to remain calm, he could not hide the happiness that overflowed. He had never seen Megan so happy. Amidst discussions about the baby's names, the assembly of furniture and the choice of the layette, the couple seemed to be living a fairy tale, one of those perfect moments that are often imagined, but that few actually get to experience. Time passed, and the 9th month of pregnancy finally arrived. Megan was full of anticipation, her eyes shining with the imminent arrival of her son. Every day, she woke up with the feeling that this could be the big day. The little room was ready, the hospital bag carefully packed, and each item was in its place, anxiously awaiting the moment where it would become part of the new reality that was approaching. Steve was equally excited, but, as always, he tried to remain more controlled, without letting the enormous anxiety he felt show. However, the days passed, and what should have been the big moment, the long-awaited birth, still did not happen. No contractions, no pain, no obvious signs that labor was imminent. Initially, the doctors were understanding, assuring Megan that there was no reason to worry. "Every pregnancy is different," they said, trying to reassure her. Some babies, apparently, choose to wait a little longer before making their appearance. Megan, although still full of anxiety, tried to believe the doctor's words and focused on the small movements of the baby in her belly, which remained normal, regular, and comforting. But as the days passed, the tension began to spread. Anxiety took over Megan in a way she did not expect. With each passing morning, she asked herself, "Will today be the day?" But the answer still did not come. The lack of signs of labor made her mind start to create a series of questions and doubts. Why had the baby not been born yet? What was happening? Perhaps Megan herself didn't know it, but something inside her was beginning to suspect that this pregnancy wouldn't be like the others. There was something unique, something mysterious, about to happen. The second week after the expected delivery date brought a new level of uncertainty. And it was at this moment that Megan and Steve returned to the hospital, seeking a more detailed explanation for what was happening. From then on, what seemed to be a simple routine consultation would soon turn into something much bigger, something that not even the doctors could predict. What was about to happen would change their lives forever. But what exactly? What could defy the laws of nature in such a radical and inexplicable way? This is a question that still hangs in the air, waiting to be answered. But what we can say, without a shadow of a doubt, is that what was about to happen was not only something extraordinary, but something that would make doctors roll their eyes in disbelief. And this story, which began with a simple pregnancy, would soon become something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. What you are about to discover is not just a medical curiosity, but something that challenges everything we know about nature and the limits of the human body. Something that makes us question, how is it possible for the impossible to become reality? The clock in the consulting room seemed almost immune to the weight of the words that had been exchanged. Megan and Steve sat tensely, as if the air around them was getting thicker with each passing second. The gynecologist, with his calm expression, looked over the ultrasound, his eyes fixed on the screen, as if trying to decipher a puzzle that had not yet been revealed. When he finished, he looked at the couple and, once again, assured them, "The baby's heartbeat is strong and regular. He's a little lazy, but nothing out of the ordinary." These words, which for many could be a simple reassuring confirmation, were not enough to calm Megan down. On the contrary, they seemed to echo inside her, as if they were not the answer she expected to hear. With each passing day, the feeling that something was wrong grew. Her body seemed to ignore all the signs the doctors gave her. Her belly, which should have been starting to shrink, was growing in an almost strange way, as if the baby was settling more and more inside her, as if time had no limit. Megan woke up in the morning hoping to feel that gentle pain, the initial contraction that would start labor, but nothing happened. She felt a growing restlessness, a fear that spread like a shadow inside her, and the questions began to arise with more intensity. What if something is wrong? What if we've been waiting too long? Steve, who was there all the time, tried to be the pillar of support. He had convinced her to trust the doctors, to listen to their words, and at first Megan wanted to believe. But her intuition, her inner voice, was at odds with all of that. With each appointment, with each word from the professionals, she felt a growing apprehension. Steve tried to calm her down, but the truth was that he too felt helpless. He didn't know what else to do, what else to say to help his wife overcome the fear that was consuming her. The third week after the due date was the breaking point. Megan could no longer sleep. Her nights were tormented by doubts and fears, by a feeling that time was slipping through her fingers, and with it, trust. Her mind was in a constant struggle, trying to process everything that was happening and, at the same time, fighting the deep instinct that she needed to wait. She felt as if her body was telling her something that the doctors couldn't see. With each passing day, her anguish intensified. Even her family began to worry, suggesting that they request new tests, that they look for answers elsewhere. It seemed that, for everyone around her, time was becoming a visible enemy, something that was pressuring them to act. It was then that, during a consultation with the gynecologist, the most immediate solution was presented: a cesarean section. "We need to schedule the surgery for next week," the doctor said with a worried expression. "The baby is already past its due date and the risks are starting to become too great." But Megan hesitated. Something inside her refused to accept that option without first trying something else, without first allowing her son to do what he needed to do, even if she didn't know what that was. She looked at Steve with her eyes filled with tears and, with a calm that was not evident in her outward appearance, she said, "I can't explain it, but I feel like our baby isn't ready. I can't force this, Steve. I have to trust him." Steve was silent for a long moment, watching his wife with a tender look, but also full of uncertainty. He wanted to support Megan, he wanted to be by her side unconditionally, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation. "If you think we should wait, we will wait," he said finally, his voice soft and with a slight smile on his face, trying to reassure her. "But promise me one thing: if things start to get complicated, we will do whatever it takes. We can't risk your life or the baby's." With that, Megan and Steve moved on, the following weeks becoming the longest of their lives. Megan tried to remain calm, but each night was a new struggle, an internal battle against fear, against the unknown. She went to bed with a heavy heart, fearing that the unexpected would happen. However, something inside her continued to give her strength. With each movement, with each little kick of the baby, she felt connected in an inexplicable way to him. As if that little being growing inside her womb was, somehow, giving her the courage to face whatever was to come. But no one, not even the doctors, could understand what was really happening. There was something mysterious at play, something that seemed to defy all rational explanations. By the 10th month of her pregnancy, Megan was at the point of emotional exhaustion. She was increasingly distant from the certainty she had once held. Her family was now on the verge of despair, urging her to listen to the doctors, to make a decision to act, to stop waiting. But for Megan, the issue ran deeper. She knew that somewhere inside her, there was something else going on. Something she couldn't ignore. Something her own body was telling her. "We have to wait longer," she whispered to Steve one night as they drove home from the hospital. "I know it sounds irrational, but I feel like our child is waiting for something. I can't ignore it." Steve, though plagued by doubt, could not ignore the quiet strength that emanated from Megan's words. He watched her, his expression one of concern and love mingled, but finally decided to surrender to that inner voice that seemed to guide Megan in such a powerful way. However, what was to come, no one could have foreseen. The doctors were growing increasingly anxious. The risk of fetal distress was increasing, and complications during delivery became a more palpable possibility with each passing day. In an emergency meeting, the doctors explained the situation frankly. "Every day we go beyond the limit is a risk," said Dr. John, looking into Megan's eyes with an expression of seriousness that he rarely showed. "We are beyond what is safe. The risk of infection, of complications during delivery, are all high. We need to act. But Megan, unfazed, responded with a firmness that surprised everyone. I appreciate your concern, but I have to follow my instincts. I'm not ready to force labor. My son is trying to tell me something, and I need to listen to him. The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. John exchanged a worried look with Dr. Kate, who seemed indecisive. Megan, with a softer tone now, tried to ease the situation. I understand your bond with the baby, but we also need to be realistic, she said. Every day that passes, the risk increases. But I have to wait. And, deep down, everyone there knew that there was nothing left to do but wait for the next chapter of the story that was about to be written, something that no one, not even the doctors, could have foreseen. Time seemed to drag on with agonizing slowness. Each day that passed stretched Megan's patience to the limit. She felt as if she was on the verge of something big, something that would change her life irreversibly, but she didn't know exactly what. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. We can't predict what might happen. And, despite all the instructions and assurances that surrounded her, something inside her told her that the story she was about to experience would be deeper than any scientific explanation. Steve, sitting next to her, squeezed her hand with a gentleness that contrasted with the apprehension they both felt. I'm with you, whatever you decide. I'll be by your side, he whispered, his gaze so full of love and concern that Megan felt the strength she needed to move forward. Those words, simple but full of support, became an anchor in the midst of uncertainty. She knew he was also terrified, but still, he offered her all the confidence she needed not to give in to fear. They had faced the long journey together until that moment, and she knew he respected her decision. Megan had an unshakable trust in her maternal instinct, a trust that seemed to have strengthened as the days passed. Time, however, was not generous. Each new dawn seemed longer than the previous one, as if the entire universe had somehow slowed down, as if it were asking her to stop and reflect on everything that had happened so far. Megan spent hours in the baby's room, stroking her belly, talking to the little one, waiting for a sign that she was making the right choice. I know you need time, she whispered softly, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and almost irrational fear. I will give you that time, but please, give me a sign that we are doing the right thing. With each movement of the baby, with each small gesture that she felt from within, something in her heart calmed. Those movements, those small pushes, were like a silent conversation between mother and child, something that defied all logic, but that made sense to Megan in a unique way. The external pressures, the worried looks from her family, and even the doctor's observations, who couldn't fully understand Megan's decision, couldn't break the trust she felt in her own body and her connection with the child. What worried her most were her own internal fears. She knew she was going beyond the limits of what was expected, that she was postponing the inevitable. But she didn't feel capable of doing anything else. That feeling that her child wasn't ready to be born yet, wasn't ready to face the world, was something deep and visceral, almost ancestral, that couldn't be ignored. Every night was a silent struggle, full of doubts and questions. Am I wrong? Megan thought. Are we running a greater risk than we imagine? But she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was being carefully planned, that the timing, however incomprehensible, was somewhere inside her. With each movement of the baby, she felt a silent reaffirmation that she was on the right track. The baby was fine, the baby was waiting, and she needed to wait too. The 4th week beyond the due date passed, and with it, the anxiety reached almost unbearable levels. The doctors, concerned about the health risks to Megan and the baby, began to discuss the need for a cesarean section. It was an increasingly visible option, but Megan was not yet ready to make that decision. She did not want to force the process, did not want the birth to happen before the baby was truly ready. She felt that there was something beyond biology at play, something that she could not explain, but that was being carefully guided by a higher power. When the gynecologist suggested once again that the cesarean be scheduled, Megan looked at Steve, her eyes filling with tears. "I know it sounds irrational, but I feel like our baby is not ready yet. I need to trust him. I need to wait a little longer." Steve looked at her for a long moment, his eyes heavy with worry, but also with love and understanding. He knew Megan had made up her mind and that nothing could change her choice. He trusted her too, even if, deep down, doubts still haunted him. "If you think we should wait, then we will wait," he said with a soft smile. "But promise me that if things get complicated, we will do what is necessary." The following weeks dragged on, heavy and endless. Megan tried to stay calm, but her nights were filled with restless thoughts. She wondered if she was really doing the right thing, if her trust in her instincts wasn't actually blind stubbornness. But with each movement of the baby, each time she felt life inside her, she remembered that this little being was waiting for the right moment, just like her. And, with that, she gave in to the wait. Then, finally, after 10 long months and 2 days, something changed. It was a cool September morning, the air was milder, and Megan felt a different pain, a new sensation that ran through her entire body. It wasn't like the pain she had felt before, it was something stronger, deeper, and at the same time, like a relief. She looked at Steve, her eyes full of emotion. "Steve, I think the time has come," she said, her voice broken by expectation. Steve looked at her, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and excitement. He knew that moment was approaching, but the reality of seeing it finally arrive still took him by surprise. "Come on, love," he replied, his voice filled with a love that was impossible to contain. He quickly picked up the suitcase, which had been packed for weeks, and helped Megan get up and into the car. The drive to the hospital was silent, broken only by his soft words of encouragement. "Everything will be fine, love. Soon, we will meet our son." When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team was already waiting for them, knowing that this moment would be a milestone. Everyone had followed Megan's case closely, with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as they were about to witness something that none of them could have ever predicted. Dr. John, with a calm smile, said, "Finally, Ms. Megan, the moment has come. It's finally happening." The labor was long, tiring and, at times, exhausting. However, despite all the fatigue, Megan was determined, as if guided by something greater than herself. Each contraction seemed to push her towards that magical moment she had imagined countless times, and Steve was by her side, squeezing her hand, whispering words of encouragement, offering the unconditional support she so desperately needed. The medical team monitored every movement, every second, but something unusual happened as soon as the baby began to emerge. Dr. Kate, with an expression of surprise and curiosity, noticed something strange. "There is something unusual," she said, her eyes fixed on the baby who was beginning to be revealed. The silence in the delivery room was immediate. All eyes turned to the child, who appeared wrapped in a transparent membrane, like a veil that covered him perfectly. The amniotic sac was intact, something extremely rare, a phenomenon known as a veiled birth. Only 1 in every 80,000 babies is born in these conditions, and everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The amniotic sac shone in the sterile light of the room, enveloping the baby like a perfect bubble, and it was possible to clearly see the little one moving slowly inside, with an almost indescribable grace and magic. "Incredible," one of the nurses whispered, unable to look away from the scene. Steve, who had remained by Megan's side until that moment, slowly approached, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. When he saw the baby, his breath stopped. He was speechless, completely overcome with emotion. Megan, exhausted but overflowing with joy, looked at her son and, in a broken voice, said, "It's our son, it's a miracle." Gently, Dr. John ruptured the amniotic sac, releasing the child into the world. When the baby took his first breath, a loud cry filled the room, as if all the tension that had built up over the last few months was released all at once. The emotion that took over everyone in the room was indescribable. Megan, with her arms outstretched, welcomed her son into her arms, and as she held him, she felt all the doubts, all the fears, all the uncertainties that had consumed her dissipate. All she had to do was look at the baby and feel that, finally, everything made sense. On that cold, silent morning, Megan felt that she was on the verge of something that would transcend her own understanding. It was not just the birth of a child, but the birth of a story that, although still in its early stages, already seemed to carry a weight and importance that she could not fully measure. She knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that her son was special in a way that no one could have predicted. And as she held little Josh in her arms, her heart filled with an indescribable feeling of awe. What she had lived through until then, each day of waiting, each hour of uncertainty, now seemed to make sense. What had seemed impossible to bear became, in that moment, a tale of overcoming, something she knew would be remembered forever. Megan looked at little Josh's face, observing his closed eyes and the sound of his soft breathing. She felt the warmth of his body in her arms, the delicate weight of a being so fragile and, at the same time, so strong. The tears that ran down her face were a mixture of tiredness, joy, and a feeling of pure gratitude. The wait, with all its difficulties and uncertainties, had been worth it. Every second of anxiety, every moment in which she questioned her own decision, was finally being rewarded. But, in that moment, something changed. Josh, still wrapped in the warmth of his mother's arms, already seemed different from other babies. It wasn't just the softness of his pink skin or the vigorous crying that, although expected, was more intense than normal. There was something else, something that made the air around him seem denser, more vibrant, as if a pure energy was emanating from his small body. Each breath he took seemed to fill not only his lungs, but also the environment around him. It was as if the delivery room, silent and full of tension, was suddenly taken over by a wave of vitality. That child, so small and so young, seemed to carry with him a deep secret, a mystery yet to be unraveled. It was when Megan touched Josh's hand for the first time that something truly extraordinary happened. She didn't know what to expect, but when her fingers made contact with the baby's tiny fingers, she felt a surprising grip. It wasn't something soft and fragile, as she had imagined it would be. It was an unexpected strength, a firm grip, that defied all expectations for a newborn. Megan gave a small jump of surprise, a gasp escaping her lips as an emotional smile formed on her face. The tears hadn't stopped falling, but now they were lighter, filled with overwhelming emotion. "Look, Steve," she said in a shaky voice, "it seems like he doesn't want to let me go." Steve, still in disbelief, walked closer, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. He was seeing his wife, the woman he loved, holding their son in her arms, but there was something else, something he couldn't quite comprehend. He bent down to take a closer look, but when he saw Josh open his eyes for the first time, everything around him seemed to stop. It wasn't the usual gaze of a newborn, that lost, unfocused look. No. Josh's eyes were fixed on Megan, with an intensity that was almost frightening. There was a depth in those eyes that seemed to go beyond simple recognition. It seemed like he was peering into his mother's heart, as if somehow he already knew who she was. As if he had a message, something to communicate, something that transcended any logical understanding. Megan felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked down at the baby in her arms, and for a moment, the world around her disappeared. "He's really looking at me," she whispered, her lips trembling. "He sees me." It was as if everything she had experienced up until that point, all her fears and insecurities, had been dispelled by that simple but impactful eye contact. She couldn't stop smiling, filled with amazement and admiration. It was something no mother could have expected, an experience so unique that it defied any explanation. Even the doctors and nurses who were present, accustomed to seeing hundreds of births, stopped and watched, perplexed by what was happening. They knew that this was not common. It was more than remarkable. Dr. Kate looked at Dr. John with a look of surprise. "This is not normal," she said, almost unable to believe the words that were coming out of her mouth. "It is rare for a newborn to have such a strong latch or to be able to maintain eye contact in this way." The doctor seemed to be trying to rationalize what she was seeing, but the words failed her in the face of the evidence before them. "Maybe it is the extra time he spent in the womb. His development may be more advanced than expected," Dr. John suggested, trying to find a logical explanation for what was happening. His words hung in the air, leaving everyone speechless. Megan, for her part, was overcome by a wave of emotions. Pride, gratitude, and a sense that somehow everything was happening as it should. As if Josh had arrived at that exact moment with a special gift, a unique energy that defied any rational explanation. It was as if the universe was conspiring to bring into the world this little miracle, who, even so young, already showed signs of a unique depth. As Megan continued to hold Josh close to her heart, she felt an indescribable connection with him. It was something far beyond a simple bond between mother and son. It was a deep bond, a silent promise that their lives would be intertwined in a way that no one could have foreseen. The connection was so intense that it seemed that, in that moment, time had stopped, and the entire universe aligned towards a single truth: Josh was special. Steve, who had been silent for a moment, gently touched Josh's little head and whispered, "It's amazing, Megan. I knew he would be special, but this..." He looked down at the son in her arms, his voice breaking a little. "This is beyond all imagination." Steve's words summed up the feelings of everyone there. From that moment on, there was no doubt. Josh was not just a child born after an extraordinary pregnancy. He was something much more. He was a symbol of hope, strength, and unconditional love. But most intriguing of all, no one in that room knew what was yet to come. Whatever had begun at that moment, with that unexpected squeeze and Josh's piercing gaze, was only just beginning to unfold. It wasn't long before Josh's story began to spread. First at the hospital, where emotional staff shared what they had witnessed with friends and family. But soon, the story spread throughout the city, then across the country, and, soon, across the world. It was as if Josh's birth had lit a flame of curiosity and wonder. People couldn't stop talking about him, and the news spread quickly, almost like a legend in the making. Josh's story began with a simple photo taken by an emotional nurse who had captured the moment he grabbed Megan's finger with surprising strength. Megan, touched by the emotion of the moment, asked permission to share the photo on social media. The image, with little Josh looking directly at the camera, seemed to convey something more. As if he were communicating a silent message to everyone who saw it. The simple caption, "A small miracle that defied all expectations," was enough to make the photo go viral. Newspapers began to take interest in the story, and soon, requests for interviews began to come from all over. What seemed like the birth of an ordinary child was becoming an extraordinary story, something no one could have imagined. And Megan knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Josh's story was just beginning, and the world would soon know about the small miracle that defied all expectations. At first, Megan and Steve were hesitant. It was an intimate and personal moment, a milestone of indescribable joy in their lives, but suddenly it was being surrounded by a curiosity they hadn't anticipated. Josh's birth was a miracle in many ways, but turning it into a spectacle for the media was an idea the couple struggled with. They wanted to protect their family's privacy, to preserve the purity of that moment, away from the spotlight and public exploitation. However, as the days passed, something changed within them. They began to realize that Josh's story was more than just a happy event, more than just a celebration of life in its purest form. The truth was that Josh represented something much bigger than anyone could understand at first glance. His story was not just a story of personal overcoming, but a story of hope. It could, in some way, offer a light at the end of the tunnel to those who found themselves in moments of despair, those who were facing adversity in their own lives and who, like them, feared the future. Megan and Steve understood that sharing their experience could be a beacon of light for others, a way to offer a little comfort to those who, in their hearts, had already lost hope. After all, if the impossible was possible for them, perhaps it would be for others too. It was then that they began to speak, first to a small audience, then to a growing number of people who were eager to hear more about Megan and Steve's journey, about the miracle that had come into their lives. During one of her first interviews, Megan, her voice soft but firm, opened her heart. "There were times when I really didn't know if I was doing the right thing," she said, her expression a mix of vulnerability and strength. "The waiting was exhausting. The doubts kept me awake at night, and there were days when the fear of failure seemed so great that I didn't know how to move forward. But every time I heard his heartbeat, I felt like I had to trust. Trust him, trust myself. And now, looking at him, I know that trust was the key. It made all the difference." Megan's words touched everyone in the room, and for a moment, even the journalists were silent, absorbing the depth of the message she shared. At her side, Steve, who until then had seemed a little reticent, found his voice. "It wasn't easy for us. We faced many uncertainties, many moments of fear and even loneliness," he said, looking at his wife fondly. "But one thing was never lacking: love. Love for our son, love between us. And it was this love that gave us the strength to continue, even when the path seemed uncertain. The love that united us was our strength." As the couple's words resonated in hearts around the world, Josh's story took on a life of its own. With each passing day, he showed the world what it meant to be truly extraordinary. At just a few months old, Josh stood out in a way that could not be ignored. His smile was contagious, and his energy seemed to radiate to everyone who met him. It wasn't just his physical appearance that was surprising, but his vitality. The doctors who dedicated themselves to Josh's care were visibly impressed. There was something unusual, yet fascinating, about his development. Josh was not just a child who had been raised under unique circumstances, he was developing in ways that defied comprehension. What the doctors discovered at each visit was nothing short of extraordinary. The hours he had spent in the womb, the weeks Megan and Steve had struggled with the uncertainties of pregnancy, seemed to have contributed to his advanced development, not only physically, but also motor and cognitively. His behavior was that of a child older, more mature, more alert. Josh's motor skills, for example, were ahead of his years, as was his cognitive development. He appeared to be not only a healthy child, but also exceptionally intelligent for his age. However, for Megan and Steve, Josh was not just an extraordinary medical case or a surprise to the experts. To them, he was a living miracle, a daily reminder that hope should never be lost. Josh's story was one that somehow defied the limits of science, but also touched people's hearts in ways that words could not express. He was proof that even in the most uncertain times, something wonderful could emerge. Their home, once a silent and anxious place, was now full of life. Josh's laughter filled the rooms, and with each step he took, each word he began to utter, Megan and Steve found themselves even more fascinated. The house that had once breathed only anticipation was now a vibrant home, full of small discoveries, of precious moments that were now celebrated with joy and gratitude. Josh's story spread like wildfire. It started with simple social media shares, with friends and family sharing the impact his story was having. Then messages started coming in from all over the world. Women who, like Megan, had lost hope of ever becoming mothers, Men who had faced health challenges, people who were dealing with loss, all shared how Josh's story had touched them in some way. One woman, who had struggled for years to have a child, wrote a letter with words that Megan would never forget. "I had lost all hope. After years of trying to have a child and facing frustrations, disappointments and losses, I was ready to give up. But when I read your story, I realized that I should not give up. Thank you for sharing your experience. It gave me strength." The letter was accompanied by a photo of a woman with a shy but grateful smile. It was a small but powerful testimony of how Josh's story was touching lives, changing realities and rekindling hope. Josh, in many ways, has become more than just a symbol to Megan and Steve. He became a symbol for all who, in some way, saw themselves in the mirror of life's hardships and disappointments. His story was told in articles, books, and even documentaries. But for Megan and Steve, what really mattered was not what the world thought of Josh. For them, he was not just an emblem of overcoming for the public, he was the daily testimony of the love and faith that brought their family together. An extraordinary son, but more importantly, a son who had completely transformed the way they saw the world, life, and the future. As Josh grew, each day became more of a celebration of life. He was not only a miracle to the world, he was the most extraordinary gift Megan and Steve could have received. He became the reason why each morning began with a smile on their faces and ended with hearts full of gratitude. And as he continued to grow, his story only began to unfold, richer, deeper, and more inspiring than ever before. If you like the story, I'm sure that one of the videos that is here on the screen will move you too. But before you click, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next videos. A big hug and see you in the next story.